It always seems like
Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of LaGrange on Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation, be given by Phil Stumpf. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please bow your heads and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you've given us. We thank you for being part of Rotary. We ask that you continue to guide and bless those people who are in charge of our Rotary here and Rotary around the world, and let it be a peacemaker in what is a very troubled world. Be with us and go about our daily lives and guide and direct all of our actions, and let all of our actions be pleasing in your sight. We ask all these things in Christ's name.
Thank you. And Scott will introduce our guest.
Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our guests. Please stand when I call your name and remain standing until all have been introduced. So Jake Jones gets the blue ribbon today for a number of guests. His guests are Holly Williams from Synovus, Andy Kinsey from Synovus, Eric Mosley, our county manager, Mark Foster, who's Carrollton Rotary and is with Auto Gallery, and Beth Hudson, who's with the Graham Law Firm. And finally, Norma Bird, her last day as a guest. She's about to become a member. So welcome to everybody.
Thank you. No birthdays today, but next week we have 3 on the very day. So you don't want to miss it, Michelle. Club member anniversaries, Leon is 1 year tomorrow, and Joe Ragland is 22 years yesterday. Wedding anniversaries, Josh and Emily Smallwood, 14 years yesterday. And to report on that, after extensive research, we can now confirm to you that Susanna and Mark Baxter celebrated a wonderful 21 years together on April 20th, not the 11th as previously reported. I knew she'd want me to update you on that. So, announcements, no board meeting. Other announcement, no district conference. It was last week, so you're welcome. Don't forget, annual banquet is June 15th. We do have a few minutes if anybody's extremely happy and wants to come and put a happy dollar. Come on up.
I think it's more of an announcement, but I'm happy about it, so I'll put a dollar in. I'm going to take you back to 1776. George Washington said, let's pause and let's pray for our nation. It went all the way through to Lincoln, and in 1865, he really made a big deal out of a national day for everybody to come together and pray wherever they were. Then Truman signed it into law in 1952 that there would be a day of prayer for our nation. Of course, Korea was looming at that time. Then fast forward to Ronald Reagan. Reagan said, let's make it a specific day and let's really emphasize it. He declared the first Thursday in May as a day for the nation to come together in prayer. And so guess what tomorrow is? It's the first Thursday in May. For about 30 years, I've been on a committee, and we've attempted to gather everyone that we can to come together and pray for our schools, our churches, our law enforcement, our military, our government, all of those things. And we use lay people to pray. The Biblical History Center has been kind enough to let us use their location at no charge. We start promptly at 12:15 with the Truett High School Color Guard presenting the flag, and we end promptly at 12:45. Wherever you are, please stop and lift up our nation, our community, our leaders in prayer. And if you can come and join us, I'd really love to see some Rotarian faces there at 12:15. The Biblical History Center. Thank you.
I'm exceptionally happy because our baseball team has done it again. So we are conference regular season champions. That means that starting today, we are hosting the Collegiate Conference of the South tournament. We have 7 teams that will descend upon our great city. So every hotel and every restaurant and hopefully every ice cream cone will be purchased this weekend by all of these visitors. We are in the midst of graduation week as well. So this is an interesting thing of trying to pull off graduation while having baseball teams running. So if you have a hidden talent, you've always wanted to be an announcer or keep the scoreboard at a game, or you want to watch the cameras, help stream, we have volunteer opportunities or work in session. We have opportunities because it's 3 games. First game is today, only 1 game, it's the play-in game, and then there's 3 every day until we get to Sunday when there may be 1 or 2 games. Lots of opportunities, great for kids. Come out and watch the games, and if you want to volunteer, see me and I will get your name and number and call you.
kids coming home this weekend, I'll be in touch with you. So I have one personal and one work related. One, I put $3 in, because I don't know if any of y'all know this, but I have 3 kids in college at the same time right now. And I've just received word that all 3 have maintained A's all year. So really excited about that. One's at Georgia Tech in her junior year, and that one's getting married in 3 weeks. So 3 weeks for a wedding and maintained A's at Tech.
You're gonna get that $3.
Yeah. The other one is for Dragon Boat. Just a big shout out to Dragon Boat. We closed registration for all the teams on Monday, so we're locked in right now. We have 25 teams that have registered. We do still have sponsorships open, but mark your calendar, July 15th, West Point Lake, 8 a.m., 8:30. That goes about 1 or 2. Come out and watch the races. I mean, Truth County's got an amazing venue. Pine Road Park, the big race. The dogs, dynamic brings the teams in. You'll see 2,500 of your favorite friends out there watching 25 teams compete. So July 15th is the Dragon Boat race, and everything goes to benefit Harmony House. And there's no fee to get in, no fee for parking. Mike Patton sponsors it, so we're able to bring it to the community for free. So come out and join us, and I'm going to support.
While Norma, Susan, and Kay come up, getting ready for the induction, I want to quickly recognize Mike Wilson, who made the contribution to the Walter Y. Murphy Scholarship as part of our 100-year promotion of that, and so is receiving the memento, which is a 1923 Peace Scholar and a 2023 Silver Eagle. Sorry, that pretty part there. So anyway, congratulations, Michael. If you didn't know, Mike just had a knee, hip, joint, elbow, shoulder, someplace, man. And hopefully our speaker will let him know if he needs to need that for bread or just to save for his grandkids. Anyway, moving on.
Hopefully, if not all of you, hopefully most of you have had a chance to meet Norma Bird. She's one of our newest entrepreneurs in the community. She owns Scoops, and she is joining us today as a member, so I have her bio. She was born and raised in Wyoming. She began working as a bus person at the age of 15 at Perkins Restaurant, and at age 17, she was promoted to dining room manager. Upon graduation, she moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and was a stay-at-home mom until her 2 daughters, Juliana, and I forgot to ask her if it's Rona or Rana. Rana entered school. When she returned to the workforce, she became a paralegal for a law firm in Orange Park, Florida, and began doing their bookkeeping and marketing. She moved to Fayetteville, Georgia in 1998 and started her own taxation, law, and marketing consulting company. That's a lot. And worked for CPA firms and law firms all over the United States. She frequently spoke at taxation law conferences and was also a director of children's ministries. After 20 years, she closed her consulting company and went to work for Interfor, the 4th largest lumber company in the world, as a sales and marketing representative. Last summer, after 8 years at Interfor, she resigned and began building Scoops LaGrange. This past November, she and Mike, her husband of 10 years, moved to LaGrange, and in December, they opened Scoops LaGrange. Mike and Norma have 6 grown children and enjoy 4 grandbabies. They are thrilled to be in LaGrange, and they thank everyone for their warm welcome and support of Scoops. So please help me welcome Norma Bird.
Thank you.
I did.
Norma, we're delighted to welcome you to LaGrange Rotary. And having been an ice cream scooper for my first job for 3 summers, we're especially delighted to have you with your business in the club. So we always use this time to remind members of the Rotary 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? We hope you'll put this in your office or your business. Thank you. Good to have you.
Let's just a little bit. All right. There we go.
Very good.
Always one of my very, very favorite things. Now, Jake, if you'll come on and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, President Ken. It's a pleasure to introduce to you two of my teammates, Brooke Blackwell and Cal Evans. Brooke graduated from the University of Georgia in 2017 with a BBA in finance. She joined Synovus in 2017 as a risk rating analyst and later joined the market intelligence team, which now she manages. Brooke was raised and currently lives here in LaGrange with her husband Aiden, who teaches at LaGrange High School, and they have 2 daughters. Cal Evans serves as Synovus' Senior Director of Investor Relations and Market Intelligence. His primary responsibility for investor relations is managing and communication between the executive management team and the Synovus investors. In market intelligence, he is responsible for determining how market factors influence CRE and C&I lending. Cal joined Synovus in 2008. He earned his BBA in economics in 1997 and his MBA in 2015 at the University of Georgia. He is a faculty member at UGA, GBA Graduate School of Banking and LSU Graduate School of Banking, where he teaches real estate markets and finance. At Synovus, Cal serves as the chair of the company's Economic Advisory Council and Economic Forecasting Committee, as well as a regulatory liaison to the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank on economic and commercial real estate matters. Please join me in welcoming Brooke Blackwell and Cal Evans.
Don't clap yet. You haven't heard what I'm going to say. First off, I'm going to bring up Brooke in just a little bit. She's going to talk about some of the intricacies of GDP. It'll give you sort of an alternative perspective that I think will be pretty neat. Now, I'm not from LaGrange, but I do want to say that I grew up between Whitesville and Pine Mountain, so I bought my school jeans at Mansour's, ate at Cleve's every Thursday night, and I had a lot of Charlie Joseph's hot dogs. So I am familiar with LaGrange, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having us. I want to start off with a little bit of conversation about the economy, specifically related to Fed strategy and the results that we're seeing. And it couldn't be more timely because in about 2 hours, we're going to have the most recent Fed information, which my projection, which shouldn't surprise any of you, would be 25 basis point rate hike, and they'll probably hold for a little while. In my opinion, what the Fed's trying to do with inflation is kind of like a campfire. They're going to put it out, and then they're going to cover dirt on it, and then they're going to put some water on it, and they're going to watch it for about 2 hours to make sure that it doesn't flare up. So I think this is going to be a hold rates higher for longer environment. Now, what's interesting is that the Fed has raised rates 475 basis points in this most recent rate hiking cycle. And if I go back to where we were about 13 to 14 months ago, our company and most people projected that we would have 425 basis point rate hikes. So it's unbelievable to think about just the volume and the magnitude of increases that we've seen. They've been stunning. We haven't seen anything like this in 40 years. And it has obviously had some severe impacts to the economy, and you see those ripples through the banking system today. What the Fed is doing, obviously they're attacking inflation in the only way that they can, really, and that's by raising rates. And what raising rates does, it does 2 things. It reduces demand, and it also erodes sentiment. And the first way that you see this pop up and manifest itself in the economy is in mortgage rates. So I'm sure no surprise to any of you who are involved in residential housing sales or realty or anything like that. When you double a mortgage rate, it obviously is going to decrease the amount of home sales that you have. I've got a child that's coming June 9th. Actually, I don't, my wife does. I don't know why I take credit for that. But the point being, we had to buy a larger home in September, and I thought I was getting murdered with a 5% mortgage then, because I was really comfortable with my high 2 rate at a 15-year deal. But now I feel like I almost got out like a bandit. It's a crazy environment, and it's amazing if you think about the Southeast and our reliance on home building, construction, things like that. This really impacts us probably a little bit more severely than the rest of the country. And it's not just in the residential markets that we see some pressures here given by the Fed rates. And I know this is probably a little bit difficult to say, but I have the world's strongest pointer and actually put it on a ball washer out there. I tried it earlier. What these charts show, I know they're a little bit difficult to see, but these are charts from the Federal Reserve's senior lender survey. So every quarter they'll go out and they'll send a survey to people like me and Jake, and they'll say, okay, complete this. Are you seeing more demand, less demand? Are you making it more difficult or easier to get a loan? And what you see is that in terms of commercial real estate, what this chart is showing is a spiking up in the underwriting criteria that banks are using. So 70% of bank respondents in this survey in January said that they had raised the standards to get a commercial real estate loan. And your first thought to that would be, okay, well, that makes sense that you would see less movement in commercial real estate and real estate in general because the banks made it a little bit more difficult to get a loan. Well, what's really interesting is this second chart, and you see sort of an opposite movement. What that's showing is demand from investors and developers for commercial real estate deals. So this isn't in reaction to rising rates and banks ratcheting up underwriting. It's a reaction to the fact that real estate investors and developers can look down the road and say, wait a minute, this investment that I'm about to make could lose value. I don't want to go get a loan right now and develop something. So at the same time that you're seeing banks contract a little bit, you're seeing investors and developers step away from the table. This is sort of a two-party dance. And we see it manifesting itself in different sectors, and I'm going to apologize for the busyness of this chart. But what matters here is this line graph. We've got a little dotted red line here. This is 0. And what we're showing here, this is the aggregated cash inflows for our commercial customers at Synovus. And what that means is that there's a thing called NAICS. Some of you may know that, some may not. It's called the North American Industry Classification System. And it's a way to just kind of quantify all businesses. And what we'll do is with construction, we'll take NAICS 23, and that consists of every construction industry out there, and there are a couple of hundred of them, and we'll roll them all up. So all of our construction commercial accounts that we have, we'll compare how much money is coming into those accounts this month as opposed to 1 year ago. And for us, that's sort of a proxy for revenues. We can see the relative strength of an industry compared to where it was 1 year ago. And it's the blue line that we're concerned about here. These are the inflows, and it's a positive number. But what you'll notice is since about the summer, construction inflows have dropped. And this goes right in line with what we see in these commercial real estate surveys with the lenders, where the banks are getting tighter on doing deals and investors and developers want to do less deals. Mortgage rates are high, so there's less demand for housing product in some markets. So it follows that you would see construction activity drop off. Now it'll probably get negative as we get into the fall. There's some cyclicality here. But what's interesting as well, it's not that it's dropping for everyone. If you dig into the specifics, and we can make this presentation available, we've got more granular industry information. In terms of construction, guess who's doing great? People who do renovations. That's because it's more expensive to go buy a new house, so you're going to redo your own. That's the cheapest way to do it. The other people that are doing great in Synovus's footprint, which is the Southeast, is heating and air. And Brooke and I have spent days and weeks going over the question and the economics of this, and we've come to one simple conclusion. It's just hot down here. Come July and August, this is going to make a lot of sense. But seriously, heating and air, one of the #1 industries in our footprint. Now, it's not just showing up in construction. You see it a lot more acutely with realty, real estate agents and brokers. Once again, this red dotted line is 0, and you can see that year over year cash inflows are negative. This makes sense. your first thought would be, okay, mortgage rates are high, there's less demand for residential housing, so you're going to see revenues come down. But it's not as simple as that. I was in Athens, Georgia yesterday, and I was speaking to a real estate company, and their principal told me that they have a record low number of listings. So in Athens, there's a ton of demand for housing, but there's not enough product to sell. So you see inflows go down because there aren't houses to sell. You see this exact same graph shape when you look at something like used cars. Used car dealers are making a lot less money this year than they were last year. And last year they made less money than they made the year before. And why is that? Because nobody made any cars over the past 3 years that turns into used cars that you could sell now. So this is the kind of dynamic that we see. Now, I do certainly feel sorry for the agents and brokers, but by trade, I'm an appraiser, and this would be the saddest group in our survey. They're down about 40 to 50%, a little bit of a bounce over the past month. And this makes perfect sense because there's nothing to appraise. If nobody wants to do a commercial real estate deal and nobody's going to buy a house, then what is the appraiser going to do? Not much. They're going to sit there and see less money coming to the accounts. And it's not just real estate. We also see this trend in C&I, or commercial and industrial lending. So just basic manufacturing, the ice cream scoops place, making a loan to that, those kinds of operations. We're seeing less demand from potential borrowers in this bottom chart, and we're seeing stricter underwriting standards on the bank's perspective, just because rates have gotten higher, and higher rates mean higher risk. And so you see some elements there that put negative pressures on the economy. Now, these are the ways that the Fed reduces demand. They raise rates and they make it to where you do not want to invest. You do not want to buy something large. But beyond that, they also destroy sentiment. And when we look at various sentiment indicators, once again, my apologies, it's a little bit tiny, but it's this red box that I'll focus on. On the consumer side, you've got the Reuters Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, down about 15% over the past 18 months. It's down more than that if you go back 2 years. Consumer confidence down about 10%. Once again, that would be a bigger drop if you went back past 18 months. So consumers are looking out there and they're thinking, wait a minute, do I want to go out and buy a new refrigerator, a new car, something like that right now, because I feel like we may be going into a recession at the end of this year? Or frankly, they may feel like we're in a recession now. One of the main questions that I get, they'll say, Cal, do you think we're in a recession? And I will say, well, show me your balance sheet, and I'll tell you whether or not we're in a recession. Because if you don't have a lot of money, then you are surely in one. And if you do, then you're probably not happy that your beach rental went up 20%, or you own the beach house and your insurance went up 20%. So there's a really, really bifurcated response to this recessionary question, and it is reflected in consumer sentiment. Now, on the commercial side, which is what Brooke and I focus on, you see small business optimism down about 10%. And more importantly, we look at two types of commercial activity. The first two would be manufacturing indices, so market PMI and ISM manufacturing. This would be basic industrial stuff, production, manufacturing, anything that's built or sold. These indexes are down below 50, 49, I can't read the other one, I think it's 48. But this is called a diffusion index in economic terms, which basically means that if you're below 50, you've got economic contraction, and if you're above 50, you've got economic expansion. And what's really important here is that in manufacturing, we see contraction, but in services, we see expansion. Now, it's slight, but it's positive. And we saw this reinforced today. The services index came out this morning. It continued to be positive. What you see is a shift in the economy from a focus on purchasing goods, which is what we did coming out of COVID, to focusing on services, which is what we're doing now. And Brooke's going to go into that in greater detail in just a second. And beyond just the manufacturing and service pieces, when we look at the effects that what the Fed is doing on the general economy, we're also seeing our commodities here. We're seeing commodity prices drop a pretty good bit. Oil's down, not surprising, coming off the Ukraine issue. But what really matters for us is that iron and wood are down considerably here. Because what do you use iron and wood for? You use them to build houses and build offices and retail complexes and hotels. So if there's less demand for this commercial real estate, which is exactly what we've talked about, it follows that the commodity prices would drop because there's going to be less future demand. So the Fed is reducing demand for investment with their high rates, and they're affecting consumer sentiment because people are worried about heading into a recessionary environment. And that's setting up a situation where you're seeing less spend on goods and more spend on necessary services. And with that, I'll hand it off to LaGrange's own Brooke Black.
I went backwards, so that's a good start. Representing LaGrange well. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into GDP, and since there are many different definitions that people have for GDP, and then also just some misconceptions about how it's calculated, I wanted to start out with looking at just the GDP equation that we use in our analysis. So we'll see if I can work this clicker. So first you've got Y that represents your GDP. The different components include consumer spending, investment, government spending, and then net exports. And what's interesting about this last piece is that if you have negative imports, it's going to contribute positively to GDP. And then also just to know that this consumer spending piece contributes about 68% of GDP. So it's a large component of that equation. So going back to third quarter of last year, they released GDP and it came in at 3.2%, which, as we so eloquently put, who are they kidding? Is this how anybody felt that the economy was going to come in as performing last year? And so we went into it and we broke down the different components just to see where that growth was coming from. So when you look up at the PCE, personal consumption expenditures piece, first you have goods. These numbers are very small count. Goods came in negative, as we would have expected, but then services was actually positive. And of that component of services, the largest contributor was this healthcare spending piece, and it came in at 0.58, and that's compared to 0.05 the quarter before, so a significant increase in healthcare spending for the consumer. Additionally, we have recreation services and food services and accommodation. More of your leisure spending categories is a fraction of what it was previous quarters comparatively. Investment also down, and that's going to include your construction component. And then these last two categories, net exports and government spending, if you combine them, it adds up to be 3.51% of that 3.2. So, with investment and services, being the larger piece driving it up, as well as government spending and net exports. Fourth quarter 22 also came in higher than we anticipated at about 2.6%. It's the same story here, goods slightly down. Your healthcare spending is also elevated, just like the third quarter, but then also housing utilities for the consumer also were a large percentage of that contribution to services. Investment was actually positive, and then once again, net exports and government spending contributing 2.54%, so a huge component of that 2.6 GDP figure for fourth quarter. Now, last week we got the preliminary release for the first quarter's GDP, and so we went in to dive in and see if it was going to be the same story. And while some pieces aligned with the last two quarters, we did actually have positive goods, and this was driven almost entirely by automobile sales. Once again, services were up due to healthcare spending, and your recreation and food services and your travel piece, once again, were smaller compared to previous quarters. And your net inventories actually was the largest piece bringing down GDP for the first quarter. And that was actually due to a large amount of automobile inventory orders in the fourth quarter of 2022, and so comparatively, this quarter looks smaller. And so when you look at what's comprising inflation, more recently it's been moving away from your goods, food, and energy, and it's this blue part of the bar graph that represents services. You can see it's increasing its share of the inflation percentage, and that's almost entirely due to healthcare spending. And then another piece of our services inflation, you can see this white line here represents shelter costs. So these are your housing expenses that consumers are having to pay, continuing to escalate over the end of 2022 and this year. And so when we like to sort of recap, you know, what exactly the consumer is experiencing, you look back to 2021 and 2022 when the consumers had a lot of stimulus money, a lot of extra money to spend. They were ordering, you know, these large toys, boats, remodeling their decks, spending more money on goods. And so that's what we were seeing be the largest component of inflation. And then over the end of 22 and this year, what we're experiencing is higher spending in the not so fun categories, your medical spending, any procedures or doctor visits that you have to go to, and then housing. So basically, we're summing up that over the past few years, it was a fun experience for the consumer, what you were spending your money on, and now you're spending your money on what you do not want to. So that I will pull the count back up.
I know in 21 to 22, I bought an awesome stereo, and just in the past 8 months, I got a 5% mortgage and a colonoscopy. So that slide is dead on. Okay, I'm going to apologize for some lunchtime math. I know nobody likes that, but as long as you can divide, you're going to be fine. And this isn't a Columbus audience, so I think we can handle it. We'll be good. One thing when we look at real estate values, the number one thing that appraisers will do is they're going to calculate value from an income producing property. So anything that spends off rent. And the equation is the value divided by the net operating income divided by the cap rate. Now, you don't have to be a real estate expert because we're going to show you some quick tricks here. NOI is pretty simple. It's just basically what are the rents that are coming in? You know, what's the vacancy? We're going to deduct that. Is there any other income that can come in? There's your income piece. And then on your expense piece, it's exactly what you would expect. It's the yard service, it's tax, it's insurance, that kind of thing. So you deduct your expense from your income and you get net operating income. So once again, that's the first part of the value equation. Now, the cap rate is a little bit trickier matter. And if you do commercial real estate lending, this is a fundamental item, and you'd be amazed how many people really can't explain it very well. But it's pretty simple. If I am going to borrow some money to build an apartment complex, I go talk to Jake and I say, hey, I need a loan. He said, okay, here's how much do you want to put down? And I'm going to say it's an apartment complex, I'm going to put down 25%. He tells me what my rate is, and we can come up with a cap rate, because a cap rate is essentially the weighted average of the yield to the bank and the yield to me. I mean, think about it. Two parties in a real estate transaction where you're getting a loan, both of us are making money. If one of us isn't, one of us is a fool. So you got two yields, the weighted average is your cap rate. Pretty simple. It's essentially a return. Now, going back to the equation, this is all you got to know. On the NOI piece, it's rents and expenses. So if rents go up, your value is probably going to go up. If expenses go up, your value is probably going to go down. On the dividing line in the denominator, you've got the cap rate. So if the cap rate goes up, your value is going to go down. And if the cap rate goes down, your value is going to go up. So pretty simple there. Now, when you go back and you look at commercial real estate transaction volume in 22 and 21 and 22 and 23, you get a very, very different story. You get a big spike here at the end, at 2022. That was the most commercial real estate that had ever been sold in history, $800 billion, just a massive amount of money. And it basically had to do with the dynamic that, think about, go back to COVID and, from the back end of 20 to the first half of 21, we were still trying to figure out if real estate was just going to collapse. Hotels were closed, couldn't go to the shopping center. People couldn't afford their apartment rents. You name it, there were a million reasons why things were going to be horrible. And then all of a sudden, the clouds parted and we had a whole bunch of stimulus money and it was party time. We couldn't spend enough money at the hotel place. We couldn't spend enough money at the retail place. The guy who cooked fries at Burger King that made $10 now makes $22.50, and somebody could raise his rent. So rent's affordability was not an issue anymore. And so what you saw was this huge plowing of money into the sector. And I'll point out two lines. One is this orange line. This is basically, this gold line. It's kind of hard to see here. But it has a curve where it's slow on the front end of the year, and then it ramps up. That was 2021. Not much activity on the front half, and then a ton of money going in at the end. And 22 was the opposite. You had a ton of money flow in the front part of 22, and on the back half of 22, what happened? We saw those interest rates going up. And think about that cap rate. That cap rate includes the bank rate, because Jake's got to make a yield on his return too. So if the bank rate's going up, the cap rate's going up, and that's lowering values. And as soon as people figured that out, you saw real estate volume start to drop. And you see it in the numbers. Just huge percentage reductions in the amount of transactions. You know, office down 70%, that's an issue. Won't talk about that today, but certainly glad to have a follow-up discussion with anybody on it. Apartment volume down 64%, just big reductions as sentiment has changed. And really you had two major inflection points that drove this. Now, I know this is a busy slide, but what it is showing over here on the y-axis, we've got pricing changes in commercial real estate. So think of it as just appreciation. This black line 0, this is an annual number. So we're actually looking at value gains that were up to 30% a year on certain commercial real estate investment. So that tells you why so much money was plowing into it. And you see these huge value spikes on the back half of 21 and then into 22. But I've got these two red lines here where significant events happen. So this is March 2022, and what you see is these value increases start to break. You see that slope turnover. That's the inflection point that we're talking about. And what happened in March of 2022? We invaded, well, we didn't invade, excuse me, Putin invaded Ukraine. But what's important about that is that we figured out that that was not going to be a weekend affair. It was going to be something that dragged on for a long time and would affect the economy for a while. And as soon as that happened, that pointed to some general economic malaise, and that made people pull back. It was concerning. It didn't really kill real estate, but it did make people pull back. The next inflection point was in May, and you'll see this chart start to turn over, and you went from annual returns of about 20 to 30% to an annual return of -8% in CRE. So what happened last May? That's right about where we were last year. It's when we figured, as I referenced earlier, that we weren't going to have 4 25 basis point rate hikes. We were going to have several 75 basis point rate hikes, and this was going to last a lot longer. And as soon as people saw that those rates were going to go up, the first thing they thought was, well, wait a minute, if rates go up, then cap rates go up. And if cap rates go up, values probably go down. I'm out. That's probably the simple way to look at it. And you can see here are cap rates. As you start to go into 22 and 23, those cap rates escalate, and it goes hand in hand with a little bit of a loss in value. Now, when we look at apartments, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, just because that's really what time permits here, you look at value increases. This is what this chart is showing from 18 to 23. You have a little bit of a bump up in 18. From 2019 to 2020, we thought that we were going to go into a commercial real estate down cycle, and we were sort of hedging a little bit. But then you had COVID, we were concerned, but then the stimulus hit, and you see that massive value increase we talked about. Where are we now? Well, we're losing a little bit of value because rents are coming down. That's the net operating income piece, and rates are up, which is the cap rate piece. So it's sort of a twofold hit on values. Now, I'm going to talk about multifamily because it's housing, and housing affects everybody. But once again, our email addresses are on here. Feel free to contact us, and we'll be glad to get into any subject you may want to talk about. So multifamily occupancy and rent growth, this is where we currently are. National rent growth is right about 5%. These are markets in the Synovus footprint. For the most part, the Florida markets are doing the best. They have huge rent growth, and that's mainly because you got a whole bunch of people from New York and New Jersey and San Francisco and LA that are moving to Florida to relocate, and it's driving economic expansion there. Florida is the #1 state in the country for new business creation. Georgia's #5. So the Southeast is a powerhouse, and the national media really isn't recognizing that, in my opinion. Now, we would kill for these rent rates normally, but when you compare them to where they were 6 months ago, where you had a national rate that was in the double digits, and you had Florida rental rate increases that were as high as 30% annually. I mean, think about that. If you live in Tampa, you know, your rent probably went from $2,000 to $2,300, $2,400 a year. That's tough. That's a tough lick for the consumer to take. So rents are coming down, and that is because we have this huge wave of supply that's coming on the market. Right now, there are over 1 million apartment units under construction. That's an all-time record. Now, the Southeast is where the growth is, so it shouldn't surprise you that the bulk of that supply is coming to the Southeast. Now, I think we've got the jobs to absorb a good bit of it, but it's gonna, 23 and 24 are gonna be tough sledding. We've got to get through that supply wave. And that supply wave is causing a bit of negative absorption. And in real estate with multifamily or apartments, what we're talking about, positive absorption means that you have more units that are rented than those that are delivered into the inventory each year. Last quarter, fourth quarter, was the first time since the great financial crisis where we had a little bit of a drop. And a lot of that has to do with the new supply that comes online. Now, it also is directly correlated with consumer sentiment. We talked about the Fed eroding sentiment. Here's this orange line is consumer sentiment. Look how well it tracks with apartment absorption. Why does it track this well? Because if you're a concerned consumer and you're thinking about, well, I'm going to move out of mom and dad's house and rent an apartment right now. If you think you're going into recession, you leave in the basement? Nope, you're not. You're going to stay there and save. Now, my parents, I think when I got out of college, I had a 21-day notice of get out of my house. We don't care if you live at the Y. But these days, you know, the attic and the basements are perfectly good alternatives, and mom and dad will float the bill, and we're seeing it. Now, I do think that there's a limit on some of the negative hits that you would see in multifamily, and that's obviously because of mortgage rates. If you think about it, high mortgage rates prevent people from going from a Class A nice apartment building to buying a first-time home, because that's generally the transition. Young person rents an apartment, young person saves some money, young person buys a first-time home. But with home affordability being as low as it is, that's making things difficult. Now, this is from the National Association of Realtors, and what it is, it's an affordability chart that shows first-time home buyers, first-time home prices. And what's interesting is over here, if you go to the second quarter of 22, the highest first-time home price we ever had on record was $351,000. That's a pretty significant lift for a first-time home buyer. Now, you could say there's some relief, because in the fourth quarter of 22, that came down to $322,000. So a little bit of pricing easing, maybe that's some help. Like Lee Corso says, not so fast, my friends. Look at the median mortgage price, went from $1,800 a month to over $1,900 a month. So you basically got less home value for even more mortgage payment. And you tell me, if you're in an apartment complex and you're thinking about buying a house, who's taking this deal? Nobody. So they'll sit in an apartment, and that's going to maintain some demand. Now, one thing that I will say, when you are buying that first-time home, and you are dealing with student debt, and you are dealing with the down payment, that's a real challenge for people that are coming out of college and younger adults. And we do surveys at our academic institutions in the footprint to just basically see who's going to get an apartment, who can buy a house, to just sort of test our hypotheses. And when we did Georgia's last year, it was really interesting. You know, we had a whole lot of respondents that said we expect to move in with mom and dad. We had a lot that said that they would rent an apartment, but we only had 15 that said that they had enough money for a 20% down payment and that they were going to purchase a home when they got out of college. And here they are, all 15 of them. Preliminary results say that these results are down to 10 as of last Saturday night. So anyway, I just want to point out as a Dogs fan that this did include the punt. So my apologies to all the fans in the room. Anyway, seriously with multifamily, I think that there are some good things that support it. First off, multifamily collections are improving, so it's not that the general economy is putting pressure on multifamily tenants. You're still seeing collection rates improve. The concerns from COVID never materialized. When you look at how our footprint compares to the rest of the country, this sort of top green line, this shows annual total return in multifamily. This is over the past year. Going into the next year, it will be negative, but it will not be negative to the degree as the rest of the country. And when it rebounds in late 24, it will rebound at a higher pace than the rest of the country. So the Southeastern growth engine will continue to be pretty vibrant. We will see normalizing rent growth in apartments. That'll come down. It'll probably be more around the 3% figure that we're used to. And once again, you'll continue to see some of those value hits as rents decrease and the cap rates go up because interest rates go up. But I do think that the Fed starts to ease off the rates in 2024. That's going to help real estate across the board. And keep in mind, all these, for the most part, are national numbers. So we look at specific regional trends and local market trends to see how those markets are doing. And if you've got good growth drivers and a diverse base like you guys do in LaGrange, think about it. You've got strong manufacturing. You've got an interstate that runs right through town, so the logistics network is good here. You've got a university presence. You've got a pretty diversified economy overall. It's a good picture. I was talking to some of my coworkers earlier. They said, how many of these do you do a year? I said, about 50, but we only do them in good markets because you don't want to go tell the bad markets what's coming. It's no fun. So it's always a pleasure to come to LaGrange and talk about a market like this where you are going to see some positive momentum, despite the fact that we are going to face a little bit of a bumpy road through the rest of 23 and 24. And with that, I will open it up for any questions that you all may have. You can hit any subject. I think we can handle it on the economy. Doesn't just have to be apartments. Yes, sir.
If the Fed goes up, has the market already priced that in? And what threshold will that do on medium-sized and community banks?
Sure. So the market has priced that in, but what the market is also pricing in is a Fed rate cut on the back end of 23. When you look at that forward curve, they seem to think that you're going to see lower rates. Banks don't seem to think that. Banks believe, at least I can tell you our bank does, that they will keep rates higher for a little bit longer. So, how does that affect the banks? Well, what it does is, for us, it's a balancing act of the rates that we charge for loans and the prices that we're paying on deposits. And banks are paying higher prices on deposits because rates are up. And on the loan side, we're charging higher rates on the loans. The trick for the banks and the smaller banks in particular, community banks in particular, is that if you don't have a lot of loan demand, but you have a whole lot of customers that are asking for higher deposit rates, that can eat into your margins, and that is part of the concern that's out there in the national narrative. But the national narrative, when you think about who's putting out concerns about regional banks, and I think I speak for anybody who's a bank employee in this room that operates in this market, it's really distorted because the media viewpoint is in California where the banks are failing, and in New York where nobody ever came back to the office, and down here where we pretended that COVID didn't happen, things were just fine. So I think that's how it's going to affect the banks. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. And then greatest appreciation for speaking today, Calvin Brooke. We'll be making a donation in your honor to Polio Plus, which is Rotary's initiative to eradicate polio worldwide. Hopefully y'all can stick around for a few minutes. There's nothing questions. We are adjourned.
I'm gonna take this for Jacques Hakeem.